deal. If you probably noticed, it's St. Patrick's Day out there. Now, of course, most people associate St. Patrick's with, the leprechauns and the four-leaf clovers. But most people don't know that actually St. Patrick was a Christian saint. He was a man who actually was called by God to go to the land of Ireland, but he wasn't Irish. He was actually British. Let me give you just a brief synopsis of his life. Patrick was, of course, a young man who was the follower, or I should say, his father was a English clergyman and also leader in the English church. Now, what was happening was in those days, the Irish would come over to England and they would capture people and take them back to Ireland to be slaves. Well, in one of these raids, Patrick was taken over to Ireland and he was basically put on a slave block. Fortunately for him, he was picked up or bought by a man who was relatively kind. And Patrick started off as a household slave, kind of like Joseph. But then over time, he gained the trust of his master. Now, what had happened before that, Patrick was kind of, seesaw, come see when it came to his faith. But once he found himself in the area of being a slave, his faith deepened and he became a great follower of Jesus Christ. His faith was solidified. It's often what happens when bad things happen to us that we reach out to God. Well, in Patrick's case, that's exactly what happened. Now, like Joseph, he showed incredible abilities and especially honesty. So after a while, his master gave him the responsibility of being a sheep herder, kind of like David. And he spent about 6 years being a shepherd. And those times in, of course, taking care of the sheep, he deepened his relationship with God. Now, one of the things that his master had promised him was that he would be able to be set free after a period of 5 years. Well, what happened, of course, is he had become so valuable and also important to his master. His master came to him and said, you're just too valuable, so we can't let you go. It was then and there that Patrick realized that he could end up being a slave for the rest of his life in, of course, Ireland. So he made a decision, and that decision was that he was going to leave the employment of his master and travel back to, of course, England. Now, in that discussion, he actually had a vision where God told him to go to a particular port some 200 miles away. So he left his employment and headed down, traveling by night and also secretly down to the port at England. Well, as it turned out, he got there to the boat and the man says, well, I don't have any, don't take on passengers. And then Patrick heard a bunch of sheep bleating in the background, making a bunch of noise. He said, well, I'm a shepherd. I could take care of your sheep while you're going across. He said, okay. And so Patrick made the trip back to England. He ended up back in his hometown and people were glad to see him. And they said, well, Patrick, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? He says, I want to be a clergyman. And so he went through all the training that he had to go through to become a clergyman. And then as he was making his decision about what to do next, the leaders over him said, what do you want to do? He says, well, I don't know. I'm gonna be praying about it. Well, one night he had a dream. And in that dream, he had an Irishman come to him carrying a satchel full of letters. And like the Apostle Paul, he heard God speak, I want you to go back to Ireland. Now, this was difficult because this was the land that he ended up, had been a slave in. but God laid it upon his heart. So he gathered together a little troop of people and he said, we're going over to Ireland. Who would like to join me? Well, he had 6 other young men who wanted to join him. And so they loaded onto a boat and they headed over to Ireland. Well, of course, the rest is history. In his 30 years of serving in Ireland, he was able to win almost 100,000 Irishmen to the Lord. He actually also won to the Lord the wife of the king and had deep influence on the king at that time, whose name was Leary. And also, as well, he was able, during his 30 years, he was able to, uh, able to ordain about 5,000 clergymen and leaders within the Irish church. And he was able to establish a lasting legacy in Ireland. In fact, for several centuries, Ireland was considered the cradle of Christianity and the cradle of course, the literary movement, because Patrick believed very strongly that the people of Ireland should be literate. They should learn how to read. And so he taught many people how to read, but also as well, he had his clergymen doing literary classes. And so that way they were able to preserve the Bible and also as well Christian teaching for several centuries. Well, many people remind him, think of him as, someone who charmed snakes and everything like that, not knowing that he was a great Christian leader. And today his legacy has been kind of shaded, but the simple fact is that he was a powerful Christian cleric who changed the course of an entire nation. And the thing was, he wasn't even of that nation. I want to remind you today that each and every one of us has an opportunity to change our world. And maybe we won't be as dramatic as Patrick was. But remember, Patrick had very humble beginnings. And maybe you look at your life and say, well, I have very humble beginnings. But I want to remind you today that you and I have a mandate, and our mandate is to make the world better in which we live. Now, the best way that we can do that is, of course, through God's love. We know that God loves us. That is a given because it says in 1 John 4:8 that God is love. Now, what we need to do is be that example of love in our world today. What we need to do is make a decision that we are going to enhance and encourage, inspire, and be role models for people around us. We need to be people of integrity. We need to be people of truthfulness and people of honesty. We need to be people that can be trustworthy, people that are faithful, people that are obedient to God, and also work with others. These are practical things that we can do. I mean, let's face it, if you're working for someone, for example, you're employed by someone, be the best employee that you can be. Be the most trustworthy employee that you can be. Be the most honest and truthful employee that you can. Be blameless and have a stellar reputation with people around you. People will know you by how you act and also your attitude. Have that great attitude where people can trust you, that people can trust you with information, that they're willing to share something with you and they know that you're not going to spread it around and talk about it with others. That is so very, very important. And I just encourage you, of course, to remember that. And like Patrick, let's today make a decision that we're going to influence people for good. People need to see and be shown love. Let's be those people today. And let's remember, let's treat others as we would want to be treated. That's what the golden rule is all about. And let's love people unconditionally and let's care about them. Let's make sure that they know that we are people that really care and are going to be kind to them. That's what people need today. It's kind of what Burt Bacharach said when he said, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It does need love. And you and I can be those practical expressions of that today. It's a little thought for you today. Well, of course, if you like what you've been hearing and seeing, I encourage you to press the like button. And don't forget, it's St. Patrick's Day. And that was a terrible, terrible impression of an Irishman. So remember, press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. My name is Robert Dean Steele. Thanks for spending time with me today.